All right. Well, hello, everybody. We kind of had an impromptu meet while we were waiting, but I was telling Patrick earlier when we were waiting, we have a couple of conversations coming up about equity, which I think is really awesome. And so I was thinking about my perspective and where to fit in that conversation. And I think about this conversation as more of a micro conversation, like your personal tree versus the macro conversation, which to me is like the whole hospital system. And so I think, well, first, let's talk about the difference between equity and equality, because sometimes because they both start with E, I sometimes interchange the words incorrectly myself. So I just wanted to like, let's start there. But I really do want this to be more of a conversation. I think all of us have had our own experiences, and things that we've conquered. I see Charlotte, and she was the first parent I met at Mott's, and helps me a lot along the way of our journey. So I know that like I'm not the only expert, in this area. So I like for us to just all have more of a conversation. But to start us off, um, equality and equity, right? Besides the fact that they both start with E, equality in this example would be if Patrick and I both were at hospital of choice, our hospital of choice, and we both needed to get there. And so if we both needed to get to the hospital and Patrick lived 10 miles away and I lived 20 miles away, and the hospital of choice says, we believe in equality. We're going to help all of our patients. We're going to give all of our patients 10 miles free to get to the hospital. That's equality. We're doing well. We believe in equality. And that would be fine, except for the fact that I am 10 miles short, right? So Patrick got to the hospital, but I live 20 miles away. And so I need 10 more miles. And equity is giving the person what they need. So in this example, instead of the hospital of choice saying, ta-da, like we did it, we're treating everybody equally. In this situation, we would want equity. We would want them to help me get to the hospital because that's the end goal. The end goal would be for me to get there. So they would give Patrick his 10 miles, and then they would give me my 20 miles because I needed 20 miles to get to the hospital. So do we got to get the difference between equality and equity? Um, and so when I think about this conversation, I think that, yeah, there's some great conversations happening macro wide, right? Like hospitals are going, we need to do better, and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna, right? But our children's illnesses are not going to pause and wait for them to get to this space, right? So they are, we're going to still have the illnesses. They're going to still have the illnesses that they have, and we can't just go, wait a minute, because in a second, our hospital of choice, they're going to meet this goal of equity. And so hold on, child, we'll pause getting sick, and we're going to go when they meet this space. So my thought is, how do we as individuals, which is what this conversation is promoting equity for your child. And I would add the caveat, while our hospitals are working on it, right? And so I read something somewhere specifically for sickle cell, is that families of kids with sickle cell disease don't complete the surveys. And I thought that was interesting that, like, so many families that I know of have left hospitals and they're frustrated and they're angry, and they leave the hospital and they're mad, and then they post it on Facebook, right? Or whatever the social media form is of choice. They tell their personal villages, but they don't tell the system. And I wanted to start off with a conversation about, like, why do you think that is? I like to pick on people, so I will.
I'll start with that.
Okay.
Just from our experience, um, with that is we have voiced some pretty significant concerns and have just gotten a very trite answer back,
Mhm.
that didn't even really attempt to address the concern.
Mhm.
So after we put forth a lot of effort to express the concerns in a very thoughtful way, and ask for the system to really look and address those
Mhm.
in a thoughtful in from their end from a thoughtful way to prevent from those things from happening again. Nothing happened, and they didn't even address it. And when that happened more than once, it was like we're already so depleted in our resources.
Yeah.
What's the point?
Mhm.
So I think that's
One
probably
reason.
partly
Yeah.
one reason. Yeah, at least for us,
Yeah.
it just became it's not going to do
Exhausting.
anything.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I don't know how those surveys are distributed, but access could be an issue. I don't know if it's coming via email, if it's being mailed on paper,
Mhm.
but there needs to be some effort to sort of respond, and that may not always be convenient.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I know that I've learned over time is the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Is that how it goes? And I'll give an example. Last month was Sickle Cell Awareness Month, and I, my husband and I started a nonprofit organization a couple years ago, and so I was happened to be on social media, and I really wanted to look and see about the hospital systems and who was actually in support of their victors, using a Michigan term, but that's just embedded in me at this point. Um, who um, who is actually in support publicly of their victors? And are we still in a space where this illness, in this example, who that predominantly impacts people of color, are we still putting this illness on the back burner, or are we actually acknowledging, as a hospital, are the hospitals that are taking care of these individuals actually publicly supporting these people? And I disappointingly found out they weren't. I went to Mott's different social media pages. There was nothing. I went to some other places, and I'll just call out Mott's because that's the place I go to. I went to some other spaces in the area, and there was nothing. There were each of the hospitals that I went to, because there is a different illness that also celebrates their warriors in September, and that illness was publicized on their social media pages. And that was frustrating for me because I probably famous around my organization as saying it's not a matter of or, it's a matter of and, right? So I didn't want like them to take down Children's Cancer Awareness Month. Like that would be terrible, right? But I wanted there to be this rainbow, right? I wanted there to be, because Children's Cancer Awareness Month, their bows are yellow, and I was like, wow, yellow and red bows all over the hospital. That would be awesome. Like, how come we can't have and there was nothing. And I decided to say something to each one of these systems to say, hey, we're talking about equality. For me, like equality is like the baseline, equity is like the main goal, and we're talking about at the minimum equality, right? That we all matter. And but what's happening here? Why aren't you publicly? Why, when specifically these children walk into their hospitals or walk into their clinic in September, that these different clinics are all painted yellow, but none of them have red bows on them too? And so I decided to really search and find the people that were in charge of that. Now, I agree with you, Kristen, that takes a lot of work because we have our own Victor, we have our own stuff that's happening. And so for me, it was like that was more of a piece where I wasn't willing to let it go anymore. Now, my child is only 4. So for 4 years, I've watched these hospital systems ignore this illness. but I've talked to people who are adults, and adults are like, oh, Shavonn, oh, newbie, they don't do that. And I was like, they're going to today. So it was one of those things where you're right. When I first messaged people, no one responded. And I specifically would message them in June when June is sickle cell World Sickle Cell Awareness Month. So it's in regards to everyone in the world that's impacted by this illness. And I initially messaged everyone in June and also said, and FYI, you missed this day, but September is coming. So hint, hint, like I'm here to help you, get this together. And there was nothing in September. So I went back to say, in June, I talked about this. And what I did was I wasn't willing to hear no. Now, my expectation wasn't that they were going to then do an article about my daughter. That wasn't what I was going for. I didn't really know honestly what I was going for, but to be quite honest, I felt like that wasn't my job. Like it wasn't my job to then tell them how they were going to then acknowledge it. My job was to say to them, we need to do something about this. I'm willing to work with you on this, but I'm not going to solve the problem myself. And I continue to require a response. And I think about that from more of a broader level when we're talking about awareness of an illness. But I think as the captain of our children's treatment teams, we have to find sort of that energy to require a response. And the sad thing about it is the reality is if we never say anything or we give up on these spaces that we're still sending our children to, then they really don't know what they need to do. Right. So I have been in situations where I too have done a survey for things personally and never gotten a response and said, who do I talk to in this department? And then I'll put like a note in my phone because I'm busy, honestly. And at this point, the situation is over, right? So, like, Kristen, you're like, this happened, but now my child is home. And now I'm just kind of like, forget it, like it's over now. Hopefully, we don't have to deal with it again. Like, you kind of sort of rationalize in our minds, like, this is why I'm not going to say something else. I'm not going to keep pushing this. But the unfortunate reality of our kids with chronic illnesses is this could happen again, or this could happen to Stephanie, or this could happen to Marianne's daughter. And so everybody doesn't have to start a nonprofit organization. But I think the one thing that we do as we're requiring equity is to require a response, if that makes any sense. So like I said, one of the things I do is I put reminders in my phone. I give them ample time to respond, but you're right, they don't respond well. There are forms in certain hospitals if you ask for them, but they're also with certain systems the ability to be able to do that online, so you can do it online. And what I also have done, what I've learned in my experience is, depending on the situation, I wait a little bit. Because Mama Bear could come out, right? And like, I don't like to tell people, but like professionally, I technically manage a mental health children's outpatient clinic. Therefore, now you think like I'm supposed to have all this mental health like experience and stuff. And I do from 9 to 5. But when when, my, when I am experiencing things with my daughter, I'm not Shavonn, the program manager of blah 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 blah. I'm Shavonn, the mother of Kennedy Burgess. And so sometimes things happen, and I realize that I can be a bit emotional about the situation. And so I really want to sort of take my time and think about what I want them to learn. What do I want them to do differently versus I just want you to know I'm really angry. And one of those situations was when, in my opinion, they misplaced my daughter after a surgical procedure. Yes. And she was having a splenectomy, a partial splenectomy. I get the pager and they say, she's upstairs in her room. I thought that was a bit weird because at the time she was 3. And I was like, you sent her upstairs by herself? But okay. And like if your child has had surgery, you're like on countdown to when you're gonna get to see them again. So I am sprinting to the 7th floor, right? From the 3rd floor with that little frog on it to the seventh floor. And I am sprinting to the seventh floor. I open up the door because I'm like, my child is here and she's not in her bed. And have you ever seen like a weird scene from like Grey's Anatomy where like the mother is she is not the program manager of a children's outpatient clinic, right? She has lost it. Her child is not there. And in that moment, to fill out a survey will just not have been really a good idea for me, right? So I took some time. I actually also met a patient advocate. And because as you can imagine at this point, I have a room full of people now, right? Because where's my child? Eventually I meet a patient advocate and they are really awesome people. Has anybody ever experienced time with a patient advocate? Marion, shake your head. No, Kristen? Anyone else? Patient advocates are at certain hospitals. So unfortunately, depending on what hospital you're at, they may not necessarily be in your hospital. But they are people who essentially help to advocate for you. They are sometimes because they're volunteer, they volunteer in different capacities. Actually, I'm a patient advocate. And but everybody has their different roles. So I've done things where I've sat on advisory boards and things of that nature with mods just because I wanted them to have a voice with sickle cell at their hospital. But there's some patient advocates, this one in particular who helped me. We don't have our illness in common. Her son had a different illness, but that really for the grand scheme of things doesn't matter, right? We have so many things, we have more things in common than we have that are not in common. And she was able to help guide me through the survey. She was able to guide me through the process. She gave me phone numbers of who to talk to. She gave me her contact information if I needed something else. She introduced me to the head nurse on the floor. That head nurse then would introduce me to the next person when her shift was over. So, one thing that I would say in requiring equity for our children is also to build your community and making sure that you build that community in the hospital. Um, I, for the first time, I think I mentioned earlier, I met Charlotte for the first time, my first time in Mott's. And she gave me like this rundown of like people that were really helpful in our area. And she's like, oh, good, you have a notebook. Write down this person's name, that person's name, this person's name. Here are the things that you should do with your notebook. So I would say the same thing that I learned from her to everyone too, is to find if there's a parent of a if there's a patient advocate, if there's one that's on your floor when you actually are inpatient, and then if you're in your actual clinic, who you would go to and talk to if you were having a problem, because that would help you go beyond the survey. Like if there's something happening, that would help you go beyond that. Any thoughts about anything so far?
Shavonn, I just want to applaud you for following up. Madison and Blake both actually was in the hospital at the time that last month. And you are correct. I noticed that they was hanging up the signs for Cancer Awareness Month. And I said to them, I said, wait a minute, where's Hema? Where's the sickle cell awareness? And I know even as wonderful as Mott's is, and I think that's where Mott's and I have kind of bumped heads a lot because it's a wonderful institution. I mean, they take very good care of my children.
Right.
But like I always tell them, but you can always be better. It's not that I don't appreciate the care that you have provided, but these are still areas where there's room for improvement. And so, and it does get tiring. And Kristen, it is so correct. But what I have found, we are now 9 years into this, is that it is very important to find those that you connect in the system. And I think for me, what I have learned to do, I've learned how to, even when you gave the example, Kristen, about how, there was a problem and maybe you went to patient relations and the situation didn't resolve the way you want. I had to learn how to distinguish between, if it's a real deep systemic problem, I'm not going to get the answer I'm looking for. And I have to be at peace with that. That's going to be an ongoing journey.
Mhm.
And so if, as long as they've heard me and they've acknowledged my concern and it's been documented, then I have to be at peace with that, because this issue is so deeply entrenched that it's not going to be resolved by filling out one survey, by filling out one complaint, by talking to one doctor, by talking to one patient advocate. And I think that's the thing that for me has kept me sane and still been able to not have Mama Bear come out as often as she wants to, is trying to always make sure I'm advocating on behalf of my children. And this is really more of a journey. It's not a
Mhm.
sprint by no means.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really awesome.
Yeah, I guess like the thing I'm wondering about in terms of navigating for the equality is, so I am a single parent um with a single parent because of a domestic violence situation, and our care, my son's care, changed dramatically once they found that out.
Mhm.
And to the detriment of his health. And we actually had to have his care team in Cincinnati, where he was only seeing a couple of physicians for very specialty care, step in and say to Mott, "What are you doing?"
Mhm.
and refer him. And we were very lucky that they did, because he they were just neglecting him, and essentially suddenly saying, "Oh, all of his test results and everything, we don't believe that. There's nothing wrong," all of a sudden. And he actually needed to be on a ventilator.
Mm.
And so for me, that bias that all of a sudden appeared,
Yeah.
um and we've run into that, and like he just we just ran into it again. I mean, I've been away from Mott. We've basically been at Cincinnati,
Mhm.
except for his pain clinic. And he last October had run into something on the playground structure at school and had what they think was a skull fracture, and he still had the bump on his head. So Cincinnati said, "You need to see somebody for that because he still has a big bump on his head." And he had 4 physicians at Cincinnati look at that and say, "Yep, we need you to go get that looked at." And again, we come to Mott and they say, the lady's like looking at it going, "There's no bump there." I'm like, "Are you trying to tell me that I am like a hysterical parent?"
Right.
So I just like, how do you handle that? Because it's this just almost this built-in bias that appears to be within this system. Not all the physicians, but it seems to be a certain segment of them, that I just don't even know how to navigate,
Can I ask a
short of not
question?
going to the system.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? Do you find the bias in the ER or is it with your particular clinic?
So I have not taken him to the ER, and that's the other thing, is that when he did that to his head, I was terrified to take him to the ER, so I didn't.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is another problem,
Yeah.
because this is a child that he really should go to the ER for certain
Mhm.
things, and
Mhm.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I mean, I took him to his primary care, but he probably really should have gone to the ER.
Why were you
And
terrified to take him to the ER, if I can
I
ask?
just was afraid of what they were gonna say. I mean, they were trying to imply that he, his they were saying that there was nothing wrong with him. So,
Mhm.
I was afraid what, oh, here he obviously he ran into the thing at school, but
Mhm.
I just didn't want to deal with that again.
Yeah.
And um go through the explanation of this is what's wrong with him, blah blah
Mhm.
blah,
Mhm.
at Mott.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, that's really tough, and it's already tough enough, right, to have the child with the chronic illness, to then have to go through certain things. Um, as a woman, I've been treated a certain way as well, and the assumption that I was a single parent. And so I've had that experience, and I knew I felt as though it's because I left my wedding ring at home. And actually, the sad part about it is I considered turning around to go get it because I had had that experience before. And I thought, you cannot turn around and go get your wedding ring. Your child, and when you're, for our case, she had a fever and she had so long before she needed to be at the hospital, that kind of thing. You have to be at the hospital within 30 minutes. And so I'm like, you're on a clock and you're literally considering going to turn around and go get your wedding ring because it would just be easier. And I found myself being like, my husband and I, um, and it's unfortunate because those biases are there. And so I mean, I totally, um, empathize with the fact that like you can't like go and get like a fake ring and be like my husband and I, and that's I don't recommend that. But
I put it on. I do. I
me
mean,
too.
we're technically still married. So
Yeah,
I'm like, but yeah, I find myself,
yeah,
I'll just like put it
yeah.
on
It's
now
it's
because,
tough.
yeah,
What
which
I
is sad. You shouldn't have to do that.
Shouldn't have to do that. What I do hear though is that you do have a great relationship with Cincinnati. Now I know that's not where you live, I'd imagine because you're going to Mott's. What I find and what I know other people have found helpful is the connection between the two hospitals. That oftentimes people, unfortunately, some physicians don't necessarily listen to us, which is the captain of our treatment team, but they do, physician to physician, have a relationship. And so I've had to, I once took my daughter to a closer hospital than Mott's, because she was having some issues and I wasn't really sure about the distance. And what I did was I called Mott's to say I'm headed to this local place. So what I would suggest is that you find who the on-call people are at Cincinnati. It sort of takes like some pre-planning before these things happen. So you find out who the contact person is for Cincinnati, and then you call them to call Mott's.
Kristen,
Um,
can I ask a question? I might have missed this. I think I had to leave the room really quick for something, but did you have a patient advocate person working with you?
No. And we're working on like we just had an appointment yesterday afternoon. Like his neuropulmonologist at Cincinnati set him up with the pulmonologist here. So like they got that bridge connected and they're working on getting the palliative care at Cincinnati bridged with the palliative care here.
Oh, okay. So you're not in palliative care at Michigan yet?
No, he had been, but the like several years ago,
Did you have
the
an attending doctor through palliative care?
we don't, it wasn't a good fit, so we're not really connected with it.
Okay. Um, there's um, there is some great advocacy people, and what I asked you to email me about yesterday is I was going to try to put you in touch with one of those people.
Okay.
Sometimes it's just making sure the right person knows your story,
mhm.
because there is, you know, who I Shavonn, was it you that told me the story about the uniform just recently? Somebody told me the story about a uniform,
Isn't it?
and having to tell their child that not, parents
Oh, that
fears.
was me.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. I was going to say,
Yeah.
I know it was you, but like teaching their child that not everybody that puts on a uniform is necessarily good and that it's what's underneath that makes them. And like, I think that's the best analogy I have for the fact that most of the people at Mod I think are amazing, but not everybody puts on a uniform gives the kind of care I want them to give right now. And
Mhm.
half of it I think is education. I think that like I think there's so many inequalities that I remember just recently somebody posted, one of my friends is a nurse at Mott, and he was so offended that someone would say they don't give equal care and that they have to work on their equality, that we give equal care. And I thought the fact that you don't know that you're not giving equal care tells me you're not giving equal care.
Yeah.
So like, sometimes I think it's just getting the message to the right person and then having an advocate to follow your family.
Mhm.
I know before Faith was diagnosed, we were at a different health system. they thought I was crazy. They did. They were like, this mom is crazy. Her kid's in the hospital all the time. She was always dehydrated. So like they pulled my ex-husband out of the room and they would question him. They're like, are you sure she's feeding him or her? Are you sure that she's not starving? I mean, crazy questions. We get to Mott and they diagnose her immediately. But like, sometimes it's just finding the right person to be your advocate. And I hope that I will be able to hook you up with somebody.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate what you said about the uniform thing, and I think, you know, Eli has even identified that and has a little bit of that medical trauma just because we had a great physician team, and a couple of them have at Mott and a couple of them have moved, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Until we got connected at Cincinnati, and now he's luckily with a just absolutely fabulous team. But you know, we did that pain conference a couple years ago, and you know, one of the things that just really caught me that we needed to turn course was that he loves Wicked, the music from Wicked, and he was singing Defying Gravity, and I happened to be recording him, and he said, no wizard, or shall I say doctor, will ever bring me down.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, okay, we have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
We have a problem.
Yeah.
And so that just was really that turning point of things need to change course. But I would love, to get an advocate and bringing those systems together and get him, because he needs that here. He needs that palliative care here, and I need that support here because we're doing the ventilator and cough assist and all this stuff, and I'm trying to do it all myself. And
can I ask, are you what is your diagnosis, your child's diagnosis?
So they think that it's congenital myasthenia or a metabolic myopathy, but they're treating him as if it's the myasthenia. So they have him on a experimental treatment for that, plus the ventilator and the cough assist. So his respiratory functions dropped by almost 20% between December and June. So hopefully this medicine that they put him on will help stabilize it a little bit. So
yeah, we have always had specialists all over. Faith sees one doctor in Boston and one in Cincinnati, but I rely on them to talk to each other as well. It's super important.
Yeah. Even though technically you're the captain of your team, a lot of times I would actually liken it to saying, and this is a sports reference, so sorry if you don't watch sports, but like you're sort of like the GM, right? Like, you know, you're the general manager who's sort of the person in the background that's like, you know, trading or, you know, or you know, drafting the players. A lot of times that's not easy to do, especially in the midst of a crisis or in the midst of something that's happening. So I would say, you know, when you have downtime or a time where he's not, you know, currently in the hospital or things, that would be the time where you're like, where I put a reminder in my phone and I'm like, that's the time where I want to make sure I know who to connect. And that's who I put in that book that Charlotte told me about those, you know, those years ago. Like here's the numbers to the people, because when the crisis, when the situation happens where he needs to be in the hospital, you need to be able to have that readily available. And the first people I would go to are the people in Cincinnati, in your case, since they are the people who seems to be the biggest advocate for you, and say, I'm headed to Mott's. This is what's happening, and they'll, you know, walk you through it, and then ask them, and can you call them and let them know I'm on my way, and they will. I know for when I, like I said, when I did that for Mott's to another hospital, they had called and they were there and were willing to even transfer me once she was stable at that hospital, to transfer me to the other one.
I even asked our attending. So Erica Newman is my daughter's attending, and she's going to be talking about equality in the next session. But I asked her, will you be our quarterback? And she's like, well, of course. And I'm like, no, like, you got to be our quarterback. I have to know that you're going to be her quarterback, because I felt like when she's so rare and there's all these weird doctors coming at me and I didn't know who I could trust, I like physically asked her if she would be our quarterback. And I tell her that all the time. I'm like, well, you're our QB, you know, we need you for this, because I think it's so important for them to understand that you're totally relying on them. Mm-hmm. She's a sports person too, so she accepted the reference.
That's a good, that, yeah, like who the point person is for the care.
I know we had to be finished at 2:45. So did anyone else have any questions or thoughts before we have to wrap up?
Charlotte, you were going to say something.
I just had wanted to thank you, Marian. I would just want to encourage Christian by saying it got to the point in my son's care where I had to use palliative care, and I basically used them at that time just for advocacy. They were the one team at Mott that was able to pull all the other teams together, and as I like to refer to, play nicely together. So I all mean would really just encourage you to, by all means, they have undergone some of their main providers at this time. And I will also say, don't, you know, if there's a certain doctor that's not working with your team, then you have to let them know. I mean, I'm APS and we bumped heads quite a bit. And then at one point there was one doctor, I told him, I said, you can't come into my daughter's room. They came in a day that I was out, and he made her cry. And I told him, I said, you cannot come into this room. He says, well, then if I can't come into her room, I can't assess them, and that's fine. Then send somebody else. There's plenty of other people on your team. And I remember he said to me, are you insinuating that I gave her bad care? I said, if I was insinuating this, we wouldn't even be having this conversation because I know who to call. What I'm stating to you is, and then we went over that scenario again, but I you know, there's good support there. And then it's going to take some of your time. I wish I could say it wouldn't, but I just would want to encourage you with that.
Stephanie, I hate the fact that like I don't think we've heard from you. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Nope, I've just been listening.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. I think what I want to make sure I also end, because I have like a couple of things I wanted to make sure we got to, is that we talked a lot about picking your treatment team, right? You being the general manager. The other thing that I want to make sure that I say that I've learned is speaking with confidence. And there is this fine line, especially for us as women, that unfortunately we have to handle things, quite frankly, a little bit different than Patrick and Doug. And so it's not fair, but that's where we are, right? And as we, again, wait for our hospitals to get to, equity, we have this fine line, but we do have to speak with confidence. We do have to also speak their language. I had no idea what hemoglobin and retic counts and white blood cells, I don't know, but now I do. And now, even before I knew what they were fully, I knew the terms. So it was one of those things where it was just like fake it till you make it. When she was like 2 months old, I knew they were supposed to be looking for something called retic counts. I didn't know what that was, but they would get to the hospital and I would go, well, what is her retic count? And they would be like, oh, okay, well, she knows what you're talking about. And I would be on my phone like, retic count. Okay, what's what is that? I don't remember. He just gave me a number. I have no idea what it is. But I would say speak with confidence, use their language. And the other thing is talk in short sentences. I am still learning this because I give these really long stories. But what I have to also realize is that while our hospital should not treat us like a number, we're one of the millionth people that they saw that day. And so, one, I try to make sure I speak in concise what the problem is, not all the glitter and the extras and the things of that nature, but why are you here today? This is why I'm here. this is what's happening, and not all the stuff that's like around it. He was outside riding his bike and he was having such a good time, and I'm just so sad that he can't ride his bike. Nope. Why are you here today? That those kind of things. Because eventually, unfortunately, we still have to work with the bad apples until we realize they are bad apples. And a lot of times, those bad apples have to relay the information to the other apples, and they lose it. They'll lose sight of why you're here today if we give them too much information. So I try to make sure I talk in concise sentences. The other part is that's for me, because 30 people are going to come in that room and ask you why you're here today, and I can't tell that long story 30 times, right? So I try to make sure that it's clear and concise. And the last thing I would say is, if you have someone that can go with you, we in our home, we have two girls. One of them has a chronic illness, the others doesn't, and dad stays home with the daughter who does not. And sometimes I go on my own, but sometimes I have to really be honest with myself and say, I'm struggling. This one's hard. I'm tired. I'm not able to really pull off all of these things that I've just listed for us today. And so, fortunately for us, my parents live around the corner. And while we're tax paying adults, I still call my mom, right? And so I will say to my mom, Kennedy's headed to the hospital. Do you want me to go? Yes. I had one moment where I said no. It was one of the worst experiences of my life because I was trying to be superhero and superwoman. I'm every woman, I can do it on my own. And I had the worst time there. And so, having a support person, if you have one, that can go with you, will be really helpful. But if you don't connect with the patient as life, if they're a kid, to help the child while you're trying to deal with some things. But those are the last few things I would say. Oh, thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Shavonn. Really appreciate
I don't know where to go
your
from here, Patrick. Oh, there we go.
willingness to kind of share those personal stories, and certainly to Charlotte and Kristen. I know that sometimes that's hard in a community of folks you don't know all that well. So really grateful that you were willing to share that with each other and support each other in that way. Certainly let us know how we can be helpful. A lot of us don't have the same experiences that you do, but we know folks who do. So if we can be conduits to help make that happen, we want to serve in the best way that we can. And I think we're getting back to Marianne. What's next? I don't have my schedule in front of me.
So it's break time, and then we have our panel on equity, which I'm asking some tough questions. So I'm excited. We have the vice president. He's on our medical board at North Star Reach. And he's also a vice president at DeVos. And then we have Erica Newman, who is an attending at Michigan and also on the equity, inclusion, and something else team at Michigan, at like the whole health system. Shavonn is participating. We have, I don't know who else is there. That's part of the group. I have two more, I think, but right now my mind's just not thinking. So, all right. Thanks for being here, everyone. Shavonn, great job.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Hopefully I was helpful to people.
It was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.